Alright, so today I will be discussing my topic, Charles Darwin. This is a look into Charles Darwin's life and some of the challenges he faced when pioneering his ideologies. This presentation took some time to put together, and I hope you enjoy the visuals. Mr. Darwin had a rough life, so not everyone knows about the hardships of Charles Darwin. Most people, when they think of Mr. Darwin, all that comes to mind is natural selection, or maybe you think of evolutionary ideologies of Mr. Darwin. However, there is a lot more to this story. Charles Darwin had a struggle with the anti-conspiracists, these being the people that objectified his every move. The people are like critics who, however, even worse because they form conspiracies. So they're much worse than the just normal critics because they form conspiracies against Mr. Darwin. Mr. Darwin also faced the growing times. His ideas were advanced for his time, and the common man were not ready to hear his ideologies. His ideas soon became controversial and actually are still controversial to this day, especially the main two ideologies, evolution and the descent of man. Alright, so Darwin and his anti believers or conspirators did not allow for his ideas to flourish. Charles Darwin wanted his evolution theory and his natural selection theory to eventually become public knowledge and to become inducted into the public schooling system. This, however, became unimportant for the anti Darwinists. The anti Darwinists sought to keep the teachings and ideologies of Mr. Darwin out of public schools. Even though today most of our schools have his teachings inducted as public knowledge, there are still schools in our nation that are without the standard teachings or the basic teachings of evolution or natural selection. These two major theories are still controversial today and are still will be sought to be taken out of public schooling because there's people out there that still want these things to be taken out of public schooling. During his time, which was during the Victorian era, Mr. Darwin's ideas were accepted by a few, but they were only accepted as possibly the will of God. People were not ready to give up their beliefs in God to follow Darwin's ideologies. People were just not ready to change at this point. Next, we will talk about his idea of evolution. To Darwin, he devoted most of his life to find the truth about evolution. He went on voyages to find evolution in species of animals. He studied the genetics of animals. Darwin mainly focused on this idea of evolution. Many people were against this idea, however, people thought because of religion that everything here was placed by God. They believed that there was no evolution and the species became different over time due to God's will and changing perception of those species of animals. People were not happy when Darwin came up with an explanation for this phenomena, which ended up depowering religion in some cases. People were not happy with Darwin depowering everything they believed in, so they're mad, of course. This theory also introduced the theory of natural selection. Charles Darwin believed that species fight battles and learn from those battles. The animals that survive have offsprings that can overcome those battles easier. That also led to Mr. Darwin's next theory, which is the descent of man. Darwin's ideology of the descent of man. This theory theorized that the Homo sapiens species, which is our species, evolved from our primate cousins, as you can see on the screen. Darwin believed that with time we started as primate and slowly through natural selection we evolved into the human species we are today. This is mostly due to the natural selection and evolution theory. These two theories go hand in hand, especially when it comes to the descent of man. They they were actually a plethora of different Homo species that existed during the beginning of time that fought to become the top of the animal kingdom. Darwin only knew about a few of them, but as we keep pressing, as we, I mean us in modern pre-census, as we keep pushing on and trying to validate Darwin's ideologies and ideas, we found more about we found more evidence that proved these theories. Just as natural selection, there were other Homo species other than the Homo sapien. However, even though these other species had better abilities, such as they had much better strength, they might have been faster running than us, they might have seen better than us, the Homo sapien were the weakest. We were the weakest. The natural selection of our brains evolved to become more significant, more intelligent. We discovered language and began to conglomerate into smaller groups. And then from the smaller groups, we turned into larger and larger groups, and then we turned into tribes of people, and then we eventually started the first civilization, which is Mesopotamia. The descent of man solidified the theory and explains exactly how we evolved from the first life of Earth. It's truly insane when you really look at how like we could have, come up. If you're religious, you believe in that. However, even if you're religious, you could take some appreciation into what we've discovered. So, next up is Queen Victoria. So, Charles Darwin had many ideas. Amongst these ideas, he talked about the negative effects of inbreeding on different species of animals. Queen Victoria did not like these ideas at all. She found them offensive due to the long history of inbreeding amongst the family. The royals believed that during this time, that God found the family to be a holy and sacred family. The family inbreeds to keep the line pure, and to keep only the purest of royal souls in the family. However, as Darwin insisted in a lot of other species of animals, this causes problems in genetics and starts to cause birth defects. Queen Victoria hated that theory and sought to ruin Darwin's credibility by disowning many of his theories. It was not until later, after Darwin's uh, theories, that the regime of power in England found out that Darwin was right and began to change how they approached things, especially when it came to keeping the bloodline pure. I guess Queen Victoria was wrong after all. Alright, so a little bit more into natural selection theory here. I previously touched on Mr. Darwin's idea of natural selection. The idea of natural selection including studying specimen from other parts of the world, such as the Beagle Voyage at the beginning of the career of Mr. Darwin. As you can see in the pictures on the screen, you can see the evolution of finches. So Darwin went on a voyage and studied the variations in the beak of the finch based on the locale of the finch. You can see that some had to eat soft fruits, so their beak was much larger, much thicker, much fatter, while the longer and thinner beaks were so that the finches could, put their beak into the ground and get some worms because that's all they could eat. So you could see definitely natural selection here changed the evolution and the appearance of some of these birds, and that just further proves his, natural selection and evolution theories. Next, we're going to talk about, the survival of the fittest from Darwin. So this is the survival of the fittest ideology. Darwin believed that every species on Earth competes to be at the top of the food chain. This causes changes in the offspring from the parents. The This minor change causes huge evolutions after an extended period of time. As you can see in the pictures at the top here, the four pictures up there, you can see that two lions fighting. This symbolizes the fight for the top of the animal kingdom. The picture next to it is a representation of the descent of man. This shows the survival of the fittest and the battle that the Homo sapiens species overcame to become the top of the food chain. The next picture you can see is a cheetah, known to be the fastest animal in the animal kingdom. The cheetah needs to be able to hunt down any prey that it can be because it is the apex predator. And then the next picture is just a beagle. It's just what the ideal beagle would look like after, um, uh, after many generations of making them look like what we want them to look like. So that's just what the ideal beagle looks like right there. So as you can see, survival of the fittest causes a competition amongst the other animals in their category. This competition causes evolution and genetics to change, and it just, they occur due to this competition. Alright, so the Beagle Voyage. So Charles Darwin and his Beagle Voyage. We must first take you into the journey, which is much greater detail later on. This voyage is what built Darwin's love to find out the evolution and truth in how animals and species on Earth change and develop. The Beagle Voyage was a hunt for the truth. Darwin wanted to see firsthand the changes in animals, and he began with his favorite species of dog, the beagle. As you can see on the screen is a little picture of my puppy beagle, and her name is Jessie. And here too are two other pictures of Jessie on the screen. So, the voyage began with young 22-year-old Charles Darwin. Never sailed on a large voyage before, Darwin was determined to see what there was out at sea and see what other animals on the other islands were different from his own on his own, continent. He he circumnavigated the globe on the HMS Beagle under the direction of Captain Robert Fitzroy. The young Darwin was on a hunt for the truth. He often gazed out upon the sea and often questioned why so many species are in this vast ocean without the admiration of humankind. Darwin found a lot of other evolutionary discoveries, such as the finches, as I mentioned earlier, along with the Darwin publicly named the voyage on the origin of species. Darwin wanted to truly find what was at the core of species. He wanted to find out how all animals came to be and how evolution has been impacted on the ever-changing earth and how the earth changes how animals, adapt to them. So, just as any other voyage during this time on a wooden boat, there are many hardships. The wood forms plankton and is hard to maintain. The HMS Beagle was a valiant ship, however, it was very hard to maintain. Darwin witnessed firsthand how long term sailing was a struggle for everyone aboard. He was shocked by the hard work and determination by the crewmen who helped maintain the vessel. Amongst all of the hardships was seasickness. Darwin was never much on the water before the voyage, and it got to him. He had a severe case of seasickness, and it caused the voyage to be much too of a hassle for the young Darwin. He was struggling to continue the voyage, but his needs to find the origin of species was much too powerful to allow him to give up. After the voyage, Darwin much accredited the voyage for being the most important piece of his career. He is glad that he made it through all of the hardships, and he honestly lives up to another voyage. Even though he, obviously long ago, but this is what drove him to want to do many other voyages. So these are my sources here. I used four main sources to get this information. A lot is what I knew was contained in these large articles. They were pretty large articles, so they had a lot of good information in them. I am glad that I was able to gather all the information that was needed to, present this to you. This presentation was rather fun to make, and the images I found were from either Google images or from my own gallery, such as my adorable beagle puppy, Jessie. And finally, this is the end of the presentation. I will be uploading it to my new YouTube, and maybe it will kind of be like a time capsule if I ever endeavor in making a legit YouTube campaign. So, thank you for listening. Hope it wasn't too long, and I'll catch you later.